Hello, I am Michael Collins and this is Media Focus. In this video, we are going to be looking at the highly unconventional French, what kind of show is it? Horror? Drama? Romance? It's all of these things, and yeah, it's none of these things. It is, of course, Les Revenants. And just a quick note, I'm going to be referring to this show as Les Revenants throughout this video, despite the fact my French pronunciation is absolutely appalling. The reason for this is it's called Les Revenants, okay? It was, released in the UK and other countries as The Returns, but it's not actually called that. And as media studies students, you have an obligation to refer to everything as its original title, okay? So please, it is Les Revenants. It's not actually that hard to spell. And we're going to be looking at just a single scene. So first of all, Les Revenants can and will. It absolutely will turn up in component 2 of the EDUQAS A-level Media Studies exam. Guaranteed it will turn up, but you have no idea what kind of question is going to turn up for this. It might be a question on media language, it might be a question on representation, it might be a question on industry, it might be a question on an audience. It is likely that you will have to compare Les Revenants to the other science fiction, fantasy, whatever TV show that you'll be studying, which will be the British remake of the Swedish science fiction show Humans, but you might also have to talk about Les Revenants all by itself. Okay, so the most important thing is that you need to be prepared for any eventuality. And the worst possible thing that you can do in the exam, well, there's two things. One, the worst possible thing you can do is not using any media language. So if you don't make reference to things like shot types and camera angles and color and mise-en-scene, diegetic sound and all that stuff, then you are stuffed. So please, please, please do not do that. That's a really, really bad idea. You don't want to be studying media studies for 2 years and then not actually use any media studies in your exam. But another really, really ill-advised thing to do in the exam is to just chat about the show in general. Now, it's really, really easy to do this, right? You can imagine someone who's never done media studies. Let's just say we get a question about, I don't know, you get a question on how meaning is constructed for the audience. Oh, cool. Yeah, I know what this means. Yeah. So Les Revenants it's a show about, well, it's like a zombie show, but it's not really a zombie show. It's very different from your standard zombie shows. And you've got loads and loads of different characters and it's very slow. Yeah, and there's the soundtrack. Oh, it's done by a Scottish band called Mogwai, and it's really, really good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. And yeah, what's it about? Well, what isn't it about? It's all about death. It's all about love. There's some really hot people in it. It's great. But also, it's not just about hot people. It's also about sadness as well. Yeah, it's also about people coming back from the dead, isn't it? And it's set in France, but not Paris. Not Paris. It's set in the French Alps. That's pretty cool, isn't it? You didn't expect... Right, what this person is doing is they're just ranting. Everything that they're saying is actually technically true, right? Les Revenants is an unconventional show. It doesn't really fit into any genre conventions or any traditional genre conventions, although it does at the same time. And its setting is unconventional and it uses a wide range of characters. Yeah. In order to explain this in any written work that you might do on Les Revenants, you're going to have to make reference to one particular scene. And this is what we're going to do today. We are going to be looking at the scene Camille returns. So in this scene, Camille Subverts returns home. And at this stage of the narrative, this is quite early on in the episode, we are absolutely stumped as to what has happened. We have seen a coach full of children going over a cliff. We've then cut to a scene where the parents of the children are very sad that their children have died. But it seems like Camille has survived the bus crash and she actually seems fine. Now, as the episode progresses, we find out a lot more about what has actually happened, and then actually a significant period, I can't remember exactly how many years, I think it's about 5 years, but a significant period of time has actually passed, which makes Camille's return not just shocking, but also miraculous. Camille shouldn't be alive. And as the series progresses, we realise that actually Camille is not alive. She has returned. She has come back from the dead. She is a zombie to all intents and purposes, but she is not a conventional zombie. Now, if you're confused, then good, because Les Revenants is a very, very confusing show, and it's a very deliberately confusing show. If I had to sum up Les Revenants in just 2 words, it would be hermeneutic codes. Right? Everything in Les Revenants is asking a question of the audience. Absolutely everything. And for most of this series, in fact, for the whole of the series, you're not going to have a clue what is going on. And this is either going to make it the best thing you've ever seen. Absolutely wonderful. 10 out of 10. I love it. That's the preferred reading, right? We're supposed to like the mystery. I don't have a clue what's going on, but I love it. But there's also an oppositional reading as well, which is, this show is extremely slow, extremely boring. I have no idea what's going on. I hate it. Les Revenants is the very dictionary definition of a cult show for a niche audience. It is targeting a small group of fans. And it is targeting just them. This is not a show for the average audience. And this is what makes it interesting. So, in order to study this scene, which is complicated, or it doesn't seem like it's complicated, but it is extremely complicated, we're going to need to have a couple of questions in mind. So the first question is, how do generic paradigms and iconography position audiences? What are generic paradigms? Well, generic paradigms are genre conventions. Why didn't I just say genre conventions? Because generic paradigm sounds better, right? Generic paradigmatic features. Wonderful. Brilliant. It's different words for the same thing. Now, genre conventions are things which show us what genre a media product is. So, for example, generic paradigms of the zombie film might include people having their brains eaten or people coming back from the dead. Generic paradigms of the romantic comedy genre might involve various, hilarious misunderstandings, sometimes sexual humor, and, Meg Ryan. Right? These are all conventions of this genre. Iconography are things that we expect to see or hear. So this is the same thing. So, for example, if we're watching a Western film and we see a character who's like wearing a big hat, they're smoking a roll-up cigarette, they've, wearing a big duster jacket, and they look up at the camera and go, "How's about it, partner?" Yeah, that was good, wasn't it? Then we know that we're watching a Western film because these are all elements of the iconography of the Western genre. And these can help to position the audience. Just as a quick spoiler to this video, Les Revenants is not doing things conventionally. Right? Although Les Revenants is about people coming back from the dead, i.e. it's a zombie show, it is also not a zombie show. It is a highly unconventional zombie show. And we're going to be looking at this in some detail. Right? Exactly how unconventional is this? Exactly how many rules does this break? The second question we're going to keep in our head is, how do representations, so for example with gender, age, and socioeconomic class position audiences? So gender refers to whether a character is male or female, and to what extent they live up to the stereotypical representations. So even if, for example, in this scene, we see 2 women, or rather an adult middle-aged woman and a 15-year-old girl, but they are very, very different representations of gender, right? Age. Again, we've got an older person, we've got a much younger person, and we also have socioeconomic class. So this basically refers to whether you are middle class or working class. That's pretty much the only two socioeconomic classes that we really need to think about, although it is possible to be another one. How does this position audiences? Well, as we're going to find out, this positions audiences in a number of different ways. What is audience positioning? Audience positioning is where we are placed in a media product. For example, through editing. For example, if the editing is extremely fast-paced, then we're positioned in an exciting mode of address. If the editing is extremely slow-paced, like it is in Les Revenants, then we're positioned in an especially, well, we might argue boring, or sedate, or quiet, or gentle, or relaxing, or tense mode of address. Positioning also refers to things like shot types and camera angles. Like, where are we? Who are we near? Who are we focused on? Who do we like? And if you need to go over positioning, I advise that you pause this video right now and you check out the article on positioning on the blog, on the glossary or in the revision guides, which should fill in the gaps there. So just as a quick recap, and I've gone over a few of these points before, but Les Revenants is an unconventional horror narrative. So while Les Revenants fulfills many of the conventions of the horror genre, it does so in a deliberately atypical and subversive manner. What this means is Les Revenants is deliberately breaking the rules of horror. It is trashing them. It is smashing them. It is saying, look, I know what a horror film is and I'm doing things differently. Now, this provides the preferred reading of an exciting and challenging show for horror fans. But this may situate audiences in an oppositional reading through its difficult subversions and its lack of immediate action. If you want action, then Les Revenants is definitely not a show to watch. Because actually very, very little happens in it. Very, very little indeed. And that's kind of the point. It is not the kind of show where everything explodes and people are having fights constantly. Stuff does happen, but at an extremely slow pace. And it's doing this deliberately. It's doing this to break the conventions of horror films. In this scene, we see the previously dead Camille returning to life, and this shocks her mother. And it's quite a challenging scene. It uses many hermeneutic codes, and the audience is expected to simultaneously read the scene in two different ways, right? And this is what makes this complicated, because when we first watch this episode, it might seem quite straightforward. Huh? What's going on? She's just got home, right? Lol. Firstly, we see a slice of life family drama where Camille is having a really bad day. As far as Camille is concerned, she was on the coach and now she's woken up and she doesn't know where she is, and she's actually most worried about her mum, Claire, being annoyed with her. But simultaneously, as an audience, we are seeing this scene as a chilling horror narrative. Claire, the mother, is forced to confront the fact that her daughter has come back from the dead. These two simultaneous modes of address create what we call in media studies polysemy, or multiple meanings. And right now, we are confused. The preferred meaning, the preferred mode of address, the positioning here, everything is pushing us towards being confused. We are supposed to be confused, and you know what? We're supposed to enjoy it. So, the zombie genre is very, very clear-cut. And if you've seen any zombie films, for example, let's just list a couple off the top of my head. Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, all the Dead films. What else? Shaun of the Dead, which is a parody, but still has many of these elements. Zombieland, The Walking Dead, okay? I Am Legend, right? All these different texts, which are all zombies, loads and loads of them, right? They all explicate a number of generic paradigms. For example, we know exactly what zombies look like. They are rotting and repulsive and horrifying. But in the scene that we're about to analyse, Camille, she's just a normal 15-year-old girl. Very normal. Zombies eat brains. We know this because sometimes they'll even go brains like that, right? Sometimes. Not actually that often. That's kind of happens more in parody films. Camille, on the other hand, eats a sandwich. She's not hungry for human flesh. She is hungry for sandwiches. Although, spoilers, keep watching the show. You might see something you don't expect. Thirdly, zombies provide jump scares. Now, zombies tend to move slowly, but then they'll suddenly go like that, you know, and then they'll jump out. So even in films like Night of the Living Dead, we have shocking jump scares, sudden moments of gore, which surprise the audience. Camille, on the other hand, doesn't jump out. And this is something which is emphasized through this entire scene. We are just waiting for Camille to jump out from behind the fridge and to eat Claire, to rip open her throat, blood going everywhere. Oh my God. That's exactly what we're waiting for, right? Because we've seen films like this before. We know we've got Claire, the isolated woman who's going up and down the stairs. We know that she's going to die, and yet she doesn't. Sorry, spoilers. Camille is just hanging around in the kitchen, eating a sandwich and going, oh my God, you know, don't really quite know what happened, but, you know, please don't shout at me. You got a new mug. It's pretty ugly, blah, blah, blah. Zombies also have no cognitive ability. They cannot think. They are idiots of the horror world. They're just stumbling around. All they can think about is eating. They can't work anything out. But Camille, on the other hand, is able to hold a normal conversation. Pretty boring conversation, but a normal conversation. So in every single last way, this scene from Les Revenants breaks the conventions of the zombie show. We might as well be watching something completely different. Because we are. This is a highly unconventional horror narrative. So first of all, we start off with an establishing shot of Camille coming home. Exterior, night. We cross-cut between Camille and other scenes. For example, her mother going around the house. She goes into Camille's room. Camille obviously died 5 years ago. So, or how many years ago? 4, 5, I don't know. Some time ago. Check it out in your notes, guys. But Camille's dead, but she's also not. She's just walking around outside. This establishing shot or establishing montage also reinforces that Camille is very middle class. Although she initially starts off by walking down main roads and having lorries honk at her and stuff like that, she is situated within a very middle class setting with the mise-en-scene of large glassy houses and lots of hedge-lined streets and things like that. We cut to Claire. And once more, Claire is in a very middle-class setting. I apologise for the picture quality here, but this is all you're getting, so whatever. Claire is in a very, very middle-class setting. So here she is pottering around the house. This setting is going to be relatable for a middle-class audience. They will recognise these kind of fairly bland white walls, these Gustav Klimt prints stuck up to the wall. Nothing kind of super, super rich, but at the same time, you know, quite clearly Claire is, you know, a high-earning household. The Surratt family are a high-earning household, which will allow this show to appeal to a more middle-class audience. So we're being positioned with Claire. She is a hegemonically, stereotypically attractive middle-aged woman. And we are positioned with her, and we start to relate to her. Then we start to have the utilization of generic paradigmatic features. Well, what does that mean? Because that sounds really, really confusing. It just means that it's using conventional things from the zombie genre, from the horror genre. The camera tracks Claire. We hear the diegetic sound of something banging. Lena, she says, Lena being the other daughter. which actually leads to more confusion later on. Stuff I'm not going to go through right now. And the camera tracks and follows Claire as she moves down the stairs. This is very, very conventional of a horror film, the zombie film in particular, which, I'm sorry, this sounds really, really superficial, quite often does feature houses with staircases. Why? Because it's something that we can all relate to. Well, if you've got stairs in your house, that is, going up and down the stairs. We then cut to do a full 180 around Claire. So now we're no longer tracking her as we've come down the stairs, but instead we're positioned with Claire, not as Claire. Yet we're still positioned very close, yet through a low angle shot here, which is pretty interesting because normally low angle shots tend to indicate vulnerability, our vulnerability, and Claire's superiority, which is not what this scene is doing. This is just an indication that sometimes, you know, stuff that we talk about in media studies can just change, right? I don't think this shot is trying to infer that Claire is superior or powerful, but we're positioned close to her. The lighting is low key, which means that half of her face is obscured, and we can still see the familiar middle-class mise-en-scene of the household, the staircase. It's all very, you know, middle-class, you know, European French households. Lovely, good stuff. But we are positioned with Claire, and we can make out just enough of her expression to anchor this feeling that we should be scared as an audience. Her facial expression functions as a proetic code. We know that there is fear, death, horror, and excitement ahead. We cut to a POV shot, and it's very, very quick, but we see a fleeting glimpse of a hand. This is where the show is getting very, very clever indeed, because we as the audience know that it's just Camille. Camille's just been walking down the road. Oh my God, I'm lost. I need to get home. Yet to Claire, Camille is dead. Camille doesn't exist. She is no longer there. Therefore, Camille shouldn't exist. Now, this is why this show is so clever, because we are being positioned in two distinct positions simultaneously. We are both Claire, scared, apprehensive. We are trapped in a horror film. We are also Camille, annoyed, bored, hungry. We are trapped in a drama. These two different genres are playing out simultaneously, and as an audience, we have no idea what the hell is going on. I remember talking to students after watching the first episode, and you guys were completely split. Half of you said, yeah, I really want to keep watching it, yeah. Half of you said, what? I don't get it. It's boring. These are basically the two reactions that we can have to this show, right? And a lot of this is based on this idea of polysemy, the idea that we have multiple meanings and we have to keep them both in our head. We cut back to Claire. Now, this is a reverse shot. So the shot is of the fridge. The reverse shot is of Claire. We can also call this a reaction shot. Her facial expression, well, Claire isn't screaming. Yeah. She doesn't pull out a gun, or well, not that she would have a gun or anything like that. That'd be strange. That would be unconventional. But she also doesn't run away. Again, she says something like Lena or hello. Again, we have the low-key lighting, but we can see more of her facial expression. Claire is confused. We are confused. We are both as confused as one another. We then cut back to Camille, who is a stereotypical 15-year-old girl. Her costume is very, very fitting for a 15-year-old girl. She's got the hoodie, she's got the flannel shirt. Maybe she's a bit of a tomboy. We're starting to establish her character. She talks quickly, in a not disrespectful yet not completely respectful way. She's quite gobby. She's a very stereotypical teenage girl. She's talking loads, but Claire, on the other hand, is terrified. Her facial expression, again, this is some very, very subtle performance here. Her facial expression is slowly turning into confusion and horror. We are positioned directly with Claire in this situation. We are positioned with Claire, who has no idea what's going on. And we are forced to confront the fact that our expectations of the generic paradigms of the zombie genre have now just been shifted. Camille is not ripping Claire's throat out. Camille is not causing havoc. Camille is making a sandwich and, chatting. Therefore, we are being positioned through Claire's performance here. We are just as confused as she is. This shot is excellent. We cut to a long shot. And again, this reinforces just how middle class this family are. Okay, we have this very, very stylish kitchen, very stylish open plan kitchen kind of reception room. Okay, lovely stuff. But also, this reinforces a binary opposition. On the left, we have Claire. On the right, we have Camille. Both of them are bathed in light, and in the middle, we have a point of darkness, a dark column. On the left, we have life. On the right, we have death. And yet, the kitchen is also a symbol of family life, of happiness, of making a meal, cool stuff going on. Our expectations are subverted once again. This shot is Les Revenants, life and death, but not the life and death that we are accustomed to in horror films. There is a binary opposition which actually reinforces how similar these characters are. This is an example of a hermeneutic code because we are being asked a question. What on earth is going on here? Why is Camille back? Why is she alive? Why isn't she dead? Why is Claire so confused? Again, this reinforces the unconventional nature of this TV show. This is not a conventional horror show. They have their chats. Camille eats her sandwich. Camille insults her mum's mug. Again, this is another joke which only really makes sense when we know that this has been many years. Of course, Camille's mum's got new mugs. Mugs get broken all the time. Camille's confused by this little thing. Everything else has stayed the same. Claire downstairs is unsure as to what she's just seen. She phones her former husband to say, hey, our daughter's come back from the dead. It's pretty weird. You should probably come over and check this out. And then we follow Claire upstairs through another tracking shot. At this stage, the soundtrack is burbling along quite quietly in the background. Okay, we have these deep, bassy, elongated stretches of sound, which heightens the tension. This is a very clear proetic code. So we have the anchorage of the tense, bassy soundtrack, along with the tracking shot. Well, this reinforces the proetic nature of this scene, that we are going to see some violence. We see a single, lonely woman climbing the stairs. What's she going to? Of course, she's going to her death. This is the stage where Camille is definitely going to kill her. And yet she doesn't. Claire opens the door and Camille asks for a towel or something like that. Her dressing gown isn't in there because she's been dead for 5 years, right? What we have here is an example of contrapuntal sound. This is where the sound doesn't fit in with the scene. Here, the sound is tense. The soundtrack, the non-diegetic soundtrack is tense, and it's very, very typical of horror films, but it doesn't fit in with the scene. Camille is not dangerous. Camille is just a gobby girl asking for a towel from her mum. In fact, it's quite a sweet scene. It's quite a gentle scene. It's quite voyeuristic in the sense that we're peering into their lives, but not in a creepy way. Except for Claire, this is the creepiest thing ever. And this is wonderful. everything goes crazy. The soundtrack, boom, 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 bassy pulse. Over the top, we hear a keyboard refrain, minor key. Again, highly conventional of the horror genre. This is confusing. Why is Claire freaking out? Surely this is a joyous moment. Instead of, oh my God, my baby, you've come back to life, she rushes into Camille's room, which has been kept as some kind of shrine, and takes away all the photographs. Why does she do this? We don't know. How would any of us react to this? Well, in this episode, we see different ways that people react to their loved ones coming back from the dead. So, for example, Adele, Simon's former lover, cries, weeps, bangs on the door. Get out, get out, get out. Leave me alone. She's so terrified of this. Julie, for she's never met Victor before, takes in Victor because he's just a small child. For Julie, Victor isn't scary or creepy, even though he's a 100-year-old zombie child pacing through the night all by himself, which, frankly, to absolutely terrify most people. But for Julie, he's just a kid because, Julie's not scared of anything. And then we have Monsieur Costa, who, when Madame Costa, his wife, comes back from dead, he kills her. He sets fire to the house and kills her. Ties her up and burns her alive. In each one of these situations, we're seeing something, perhaps an unnatural way, but then we're seeing a completely unnatural phenomenon occur here. Just a couple of words, right? This is highly confusing. And this is emphasized by the use of the soundtrack. So the soundtrack to this TV show was made by a Glaswegian rock band called Mogwai, who literally just released a new album. Just check it out. It's pretty good. And normally they're a very, very kind of loud, thrashy, kind of rocky metal band. But they also do lots of mood pieces as well. And the soundtrack to this show is very unconventional for a TV show, but it is very conventional for a horror film, for a horror show, for a horror narrative, which really, really reinforces the confusing and voyeuristic nature. We're seeing Claire here question her own sanity. We're seeing Claire here question what she's doing. And this, in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of socioeconomic class, positions us in a highly atypical way. Like, why is this happening? This is not something which should happen in this situation. When we see a household like this, when we see characters like this, we expect, quite frankly, a very straightforward drama. But instead, we have a very different kind of TV show, one about people coming back from the dead. This is totally confusing to the audience. We are left with no real anchorage at this stage as to what's going on. As the narrative unfolds, and it really, really does, we have things explained to us somewhat more. But actually, when this episode ends, we have a couple of questions answered. For example, actually, Camille died several years ago. She didn't just die last night or something like that. But then we have many more questions asked, like, okay, so what actually did happen? Why are these characters coming back from the dead? It's really, really important that when we answer a question like this in the exam, we don't just go off and rant. So we need to talk about things like establishing shots. We need to talk about things like the use of low-key lighting and tracking shots and audience positioning, the use of the reverse shot, the idea that the audience are having their expectations subverted, and the binary opposition between life and death as well. Because Les Revenants is not so much a show about conventional narrative, but instead it is a show about hermeneutics. It is a show about mystery, and it is a show about trying to get to the bottom of this mystery.